Hey, Megan, welcome to the podcast. Introduce yourself, and you're a real estate professional, but go ahead and take it from there because I'm fumbling the intro already.
Yes, Megan Buchanan with Northwest Home Team. I've been a real estate agent since early 2019.
Awesome. That's actually when I got back into the mortgage business after about a 2-year break. And it's been a wild ride since then, going through COVID and interest rate changes and all sorts of stuff.
Yes.
And you just seem to have a good track record and you're executing and a good network and you just kind of keep closing.
Yep, keep closing, and it's all about relationships. That's what this business is about. So you maintain your relationships and you grow and build new relationships, and business follows.
And we actually have known each other. I was thinking about this earlier today, knowing that you were going to come do some video work. I think it was 2000, right?
Yeah.
So 23 years.
Yes.
So I'm really good at math.
Yep.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
So crazy, known each other a long time. It'll be fun to talk about a few things today. One of the things I thought maybe we could start on is the difference between, as a real estate agent, working. Actually, let me back up. We'll get to that next. The first thing I want to talk about, say you find a house, you love it. How do you know if that's priced appropriately and whether you should make an offer at list price or not? I know it's pretty easy to find the house you like and say, ooh, like countertops or cool kitchen or awesome backyard. But how do you take that the next step further and say, hey, I want to get pre-approved for this house. Is this even priced market appropriate?
Well, so how I do business is, if a buyer comes to me and says, hey, I'm interested in purchasing a house, the first thing we do is get them pre-approved so that we know what price point we're shopping within. Because somebody could like a $500,000 home but only qualify for $350,000.
Sure.
And then, well, that's just heartache and heartbreak all around. So I get them pre-approved with the lender. Then from there, say they're approved for that $500,000 home, we start looking, in the price range, usually $450,000 to $500,000, see what kind of piques their interest. And if we look at a home that they want to submit an offer in, I will price it out according to the comps. So I'm looking at square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, lot size, the age of the home, the finishes of the home. And we always start within the closest radius of our subject property and then work our way out to see what's comparable. Is it priced right? Is it overpriced? Is it sitting for a long time because it's overpriced? Or is it sitting for a while because the market shifted? What's going on with this property that's making it still available?
And so you're mostly data-driven, looking at what other properties have actually sold.
Yes.
So you're more looking at what is a current buyer paying in the current market.
Correct.
Okay. So that seems fairly basic, but I guess it would take some time to kind of compile comps. And what if you're in a scenario, like something we've seen when you get an appraisal on your property, they pretty much do the same thing. They look for recently sold comps in the area. If it's a unique property or if it's in an interesting location, they maybe don't have comps. And so it becomes really challenging to do an appraisal and pull a value. If it's a unique property, what kind of tools would you have in a scenario like that? Just expand your search criteria?
Yep. Expand the search criteria. If it's a one-of-a-kind property and nothing's sold in the last 6 months or even in the last year, then I call the title company and I say, hey, can you pull comps? Because what I'm able to see is what's on the MLS as sold. Well, not everything goes on the MLS. If it's a private transaction, I'm not going to be privy to that information. So they send me over information, and from there I can do a little bit of in-depth search, see what I can come up with as far as value.
Okay, so that actually opens up kind of a different topic. So something that a real estate agent might have access to based on their connections and their network would be title professionals that work at title companies that can help you find off-market transactions. Yeah. And this just goes maybe to having a good network in general. You might know of stuff that is not public or maybe not advertised yet. Maybe, hey, we're going to get this ready. We'd take some offers before we put it on the market if there are any out there.
Right.
And that can be a huge boon for your buyer to get into something maybe a little bit with less competition.
Yes. And Jason, my other half, does that often. If you look on his Facebook, he'll post properties that he owns because I can't do it. As a licensed agent, I'm limited to what I can do. So he'll post his properties, hey, this is a pre-sale deal, to see what buyers he can conjure up or what interest is out there.
Awesome. So that would be a little bit different, probably working with a buyer versus a seller. So maybe that can kind of parlay us into our next topic here of what are the differences? I mean, you see both sides. You like to work with everybody, it would seem like. And so what differences do you see between those types of clients? setting expectations.
Hmm.
Obviously, the buyer wants it to be cheaper. The
Right.
seller wants it to be more expensive.
Correct.
And you're in the middle ground saying, hey, let's find something that's fair for everybody.
Yes.
And I'd love to help you if I can.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the difference between buyers and sellers right now.
Well, so I price a property the same way, either way. And if I'm representing a buyer and I'm pricing out a property, and we say it's been on the market for 60 days or 70 days, and my client's really interested, the first thing I'm doing is calling that other agent to establish a connection with them, to establish some sort of relationship so that we can talk about what might be acceptable for their seller. Because I don't want to offend anybody and I don't want to waste anybody's time. So I'm building that relationship from the beginning. And then from there, it's all about negotiating. What's going to be in the best interest for my buyer, because that's the client that I'm representing in this scenario, and what fits their budget, their criteria. Do they need closing costs? Do they need, what are their needs that I'm going to write into this contract? And then from there, I prep the listing agent so that we can kind of come up with something before it's in writing. When I'm representing a seller and I have a buyer's agent calling me saying, hey, I have a client that's interested in this property, and say we've been on the market for a little while, because that's just standard these days. I'm communicating with them about what my seller needs. Is it the closing date? Is that going to be preferential for him, or is it going to be top dollar? Because sometimes, if you've got an investor client and they need that money to turn over to get into the next property, they might sacrifice, a little bit of funds for a quicker closing date. If it's a standard, residential home that my seller is occupying the home, do they need a longer closing date so that they can get into their new property? So there's a lot of different points of a transaction, and you just have to know what your client's needs are first and foremost, and then you have to establish a connection with the agent on the other side of the transaction, whoever, whatever side you're representing.
So it's a lot more than just, hey, the last 4 houses sold for this. I'll average them out and price you at that. That'd be way too easy.
Right.
So it's relationships, it's market research, it's also keeping current on what the trends are doing.
Yep.
Are people throwing out crazy earnest monies? So maybe pricing is normal, but earnest money is not normal.
Yeah.
And that could be a local thing.
Right.
I know in Seattle, you're bringing a lot more earnest money than you are in Olympia.
Right.
Like significantly more.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference that I've noticed just between, local areas that are only separated by 60 miles.
Right.
And then you can see, I would say, I don't know what the percentage would be, but it would be significant. Maybe, 15 or 10 grand more for the same exact house.
Right.
And earnest money is kind of a weird thing.
Yeah.
Because it's a deposit on what you're going to put down anyway.
Right.
So put all of it.
Right.
I mean, you don't want to tie your money up, but that money is in escrow in a safe place. And if anything goes sideways, it comes back. So, unless you're
Most
like
of
the
the
king of earning money on your money,
Right.
you would be fine to set it aside for a month or two. Obviously, you're not just willy-nilly.
Right.
But, hopefully you would understand that escrow is kind of a weird bargaining chip because you're not really putting anything extra on the table.
Right. It is a weird bargaining chip, but if you have I guess the point is that it is a bargaining chip that can be lost. If you don't have a skilled agent who knows the ins and outs of the contract and keeps to the timelines of the contract that are agreed upon, then you do stand to lose that earnest money. And that's where it comes into, well, worst case scenario, what's at risk? But, you have to build the trust. You have to pick a reputable agent who knows what they're doing to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So that's why as a real estate agent, it would also benefit you to know multiple loan officers and multiple different lending companies, not to have all these connections, but just to know, hey, who can perform, who can get it done? Is there anybody I need to watch out for?
Right.
Like, I don't want to say anything about any companies, but maybe there's some online lenders that like you've noticed, that can be challenging versus the local lender and things like that. So really going back to the network, that seems to be really, really paramount.
Yes. Yeah. I actually had 2 transactions within a 2-week time span that the lenders were not local, and it was awful. It was so bad that I decided, hey, from now on, if I'm representing a seller and they don't have a local lender, or the buyer doesn't have a local lender, I'm going to give them a couple of lenders and say, here, you can choose from one of these 3 or 4, and you need to change your loan over. Because to represent my seller, I have to make sure that we keep to the timelines of the contract. And in order to do that, I have to trust that the lender will perform their job diligently and timely and, communicate.
Yeah. And when you say an awful transaction, you hear this a lot, but I've never heard that many people actually describe what it means. Like, oh, it just went terrible. Make sure you get a pro. Going terrible means no return phone calls, no answers on deadlines.
Yes.
Maybe you're supposed to have a document that you signed several days before closing and it's not there.
Yes.
And now hey, if I don't sign this 3 days before closing,
right,
my closing day gets pushed until I sign that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's what we mean by terrible transactions. You can miss a closing date. You can say, hey, I'm going to put a $20,000 earnest money and I'm going to close by this date.
Right.
And then you forfeit that $20,000, don't get the house, missed your date. Go have a bad day. The seller will relist their house.
Right. Exactly.
And that's a huge deal.
That is a huge deal. And that, goes back to the earnest money being a bargaining chip. That truly is a bargaining chip, and in most contracts, not all, but say the standard contract, there's an option in there for the seller's notice, or the seller to give the notice to the buyer that they need to perform with their financing. And if the lender isn't doing their job to move the transaction along, the seller can say, hey, buyer, I want you to waive your financing and move to close. So either come up with the funds or I'm going back on the market and keeping your earnest money. So
and we educate people both on my side and your side saying, hey, here's what you're getting into
Yes.
and here's what your earnest money is.
Yes.
Some people make non-refundable earnest monies to be even stronger and say, hey, no matter what happens, you've got my earnest money. I'm going to close on this time. Evergreen Home Loans, we will actually issue a pre-approval that says, hey, as the lender, we'll close you within 21 days or we'll pay that seller $5,000.
Yeah.
So that's like the lender putting up their own earnest money,
Right.
which is pretty unique.
Yeah.
And so there are assurances that you can get into as a buyer, and there are assurances that you can be aware of as a seller to look out for from your buyers.
Right. Right.
Okay. Well, Megan, thanks for stopping by today. It was great chatting with you. I think we have a lot more we can unpack, but we'll save that for a future video and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
All right. Take care.
You too.